They were just two kids, innocent, bright-eyed, safe in the arms of their grandparents, tucked away in a quiet farmhouse surrounded by fields and family, until one night, everything vanished in smoke and fire. This wasn't some remote, distant horror buried in the past. No, this happened in 2012. And more than a decade later, the silence surrounding this case is deafening. Two small children, 9-year-old Chloe Leverett and 7-year-old Gage Daniel, were living a peaceful life in Unionville, Tennessee. A rural home, a tight-knit family, no warning signs. But one night in September, their world was consumed by flames. The house was reduced to ash. Their grandparents were found in the rubble, but the children were not. No footprints, no remains, no answers. That night triggered the longest-running Amber Alert in Tennessee history, one that's still active to this very day. Yet barely anyone talks about it. No national headlines, no closure. Just a void, and a mother still screaming into it, desperate to bring her children home. How can two children disappear from a burning house without a trace? How can over 10 years pass with no clear explanation? And why does this case feel like a modern-day Sodder children mystery, wrapped in grief, confusion, and haunting silence? Welcome to True Crimes by Dominic. In today's story, we're peeling back the scorched layers of a mystery that refuses to be buried. A story full of disturbing gaps, unanswered questions, and a town haunted by what might have really happened that night. If you're drawn to mysteries that go deeper than just crime, the ones that twist your gut and leave you thinking long after the screen goes dark, you're in the right place. Make sure to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss another chilling case. And tell me in the comments, do you believe Chloe and Gage were ever in that house when it burned? Or did someone take them before the fire ever started? Let's begin. Gage Daniel was born on June 29, 2005. He was Chloe's little half-brother, and from the moment he came into the world, life handed him a battle. He was diagnosed with Dandy-Walker syndrome, a rare condition that affects the part of the brain responsible for movement and coordination. But Gage didn't care. He was the kind of kid who smiled through anything. He didn't see his condition as a limitation, just something he carried with him like a backpack, while he ran headfirst into life. Everyone called him Buster, and wherever his grandfather Bubba went, Buster followed. He was his shadow, his sidekick, the kid who never stopped asking questions. The kind of boy who wanted to be part of everything, the chores, the laughs, the conversations. He was all heart and endless curiosity. Chloe and Gage were inseparable. Not just siblings, best friends. But behind the laughter and the sunshine of country life, their mother Cheryl was struggling. She had already endured heartbreak after heartbreak, including the unexpected death of Chloe's father, and the weight of it all eventually broke her down. Addiction crept in, mental health challenges deepened, and over time it became clear she couldn't care for the children on her own. When Gage was just 2 and Chloe 4, Cheryl made an incredibly hard decision. She asked her parents, Molly and Bubba McLaren, to take custody of her kids just for a while. She said until she could get back on her feet. And without hesitation, they said yes. Because that's who they were. In Unionville, Tennessee, everyone knew Molly and Bubba. Bubba especially was known as a man who dropped whatever he was doing to help someone else. Their home wasn't just a house, it was the kind of place people felt safe. It had been in the family for generations. The land, the farmhouse, the way of life, it was all part of something sacred. And now, it was where Chloe and Gage would grow up. And they did grow up there full of joy, laughter, and country freedom. The children thrived under their grandparents' care. They had a big yard to roam, animals to feed, cousins who lived just down the road, and a home surrounded by rolling farmland. They went to school, made friends easily, and spent their evenings playing outside, racing around on the family's gator until the sun dipped behind the hills. Even Cheryl stayed in their lives. She visited them often, still trying to put the pieces of her own life back together. The situation wasn't perfect, but it worked. It was steady, safe. For 5 years, that farmhouse on Kingdom Road was their whole world. Until September 23rd, 2012, the night everything fell apart. That Sunday evening, neighbors spotted Chloe and Gage outside playing around 6:30 p.m., nothing unusual. Just two kids chasing daylight, laughing on the gator as usual. Eventually, they were called in for the night. School was the next morning, and it was time for dinner, baths, and bed. But just 3 hours later, chaos erupted. At around 9:30 p.m., a call came into 911. A neighbor or perhaps a passerby had seen flames tearing through the McLaren house. The fire wasn't just starting, it was already roaring, lighting up the night sky, devouring the home from the inside out. Firefighters rushed to the scene, but Unionville is rural, and that means no fire hydrants, limited equipment, limited water. They had to drive back and forth to find enough water to even begin fighting the inferno. The flames moved faster than anyone could react. By the time fire crews arrived, the structure was collapsing in on itself, walls giving way, the roof caving in, the blaze swallowing everything in its path. At that moment, Cheryl, who lived nearby in Shelbyville, had no idea what was happening. She was asleep until her sister showed up in a panic, pounding on her door, screaming that the house was on fire. Cheryl couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Her children, her parents, all of them, inside that house. She was so overcome, her sister had to help her dress just so she could get out the door. And when she got to the property, it was already too late. The house was still burning. She tried to run toward the flames to find some way in to save the people she loved most, but she was held back. There was no way in, no chance of survival. All Cheryl could do was watch as everything she loved disappeared into smoke. By that time of night, it was assumed the family had already gone to bed. Maybe they never woke up. Maybe they never smelled the smoke. Maybe they were trapped from the start. It wasn't until nearly 4 a.m., hours later, that firefighters were finally able to put the fire out. What was once a beloved generational home was now nothing but charred debris, rubble, ashes. The firefighters began the slow, excruciating task of searching for the bodies. The family had drawn up a sketch of the house's layout to help guide the searchers. The bedrooms, the likely locations of the beds, the most probable places to look for remains. Eventually, they made their first grim discovery. Molly and Bubba found in the basement, lying side by side. That spot was directly beneath Bubba's bedroom. It was likely the floor had collapsed beneath them during the fire. Investigators believed that they had gone to bed as usual, never waking up as the smoke filled their lungs. A peaceful end to a horrific night. Then came a third body. This one was near the children's room. Everyone feared the worst, that this was one of the kids. And early that morning, a press conference confirmed what everyone believed. 4 lives lost: Molly, Bubba, and presumably both children. But then the story twisted. As forensic teams examined that third body, they made a chilling discovery. It wasn't a child. It wasn't human. It was the family's dog. Suddenly, the truth shattered everything they thought they knew. Molly and Bubba were dead. The family pet was found, but there were no remains of Chloe and Gage. Not even fragments. Nothing. Authorities assumed maybe the children's remains were simply buried deeper in the wreckage. So they brought in cadaver dogs trained to detect human remains, even in the worst conditions. But the dogs found nothing. Next came forensic experts, including Dr. Hugh Berryman, a renowned anthropologist, who arrived with a full team to comb the debris. Then came arson specialists, bomb technicians, fire scene analysts, every expert they could find. Still nothing. Finally, they escalated it to the highest level. They brought in specialists who had worked the 9/11's Ground Zero recovery efforts, experts in sifting through ash, locating bone fragments, identifying the tiniest remains. They went through the debris wheelbarrow by wheelbarrow, searching for anything: bone, teeth, even the smallest clue. They found burnt food, charred items, even the hollow bones of the family's pet cockatoo. But not a single sign of either child. And while people tried to offer explanations, maybe the fire had burned so hot it completely disintegrated the remains. Every fire expert said the same thing. That doesn't happen. Not with children. Not in this kind of fire. Teeth and bones remain. always, but there were none. And with no physical evidence of the children ever being inside the home that night, the tragic fire quickly spiraled into something darker, deeper, and far more disturbing. A mystery no one could explain. So now the questions grow louder. Were Chloe and Gage even in the house when it burned? Did someone take them before the fire started? Or did something else entirely happen that night, something no one has yet uncovered? When a fire burns hot enough to level a house, people assume the worst, that it leaves nothing behind. But that's not how fire actually works. Dr. William Bass, the founder of the world-renowned Body Farm at the University of Tennessee, knows this better than almost anyone. He studied what happens to human remains in extreme conditions. And according to him, even in a crematorium, where temperatures are far more controlled and intense than a house fire, you can still identify bones when the chamber is opened, even when the remains belong to children. In fact, Dr. Bass pointed out something that made the situation even more disturbing. Children have more bones than adults. Their skeletons are still developing, full of cartilage and delicate growth plates. So in theory, it should have been easier to recover some trace of Chloe and Gage. But there was nothing. Not a bone, not a tooth, not a fragment. And while the sheriff's department in Bedford County held onto the idea that the children had perished in the fire, that somehow their remains were simply lost in the rubble, not everyone agreed. In fact, the deeper experts looked, the more impossible that explanation seemed. Dr. Mike Tabor, a respected medical examiner, stepped forward publicly, clearly disturbed by what he'd seen, or rather, what he hadn't seen. He emphasized that they had located the remains of the family's dog, a cockatoo. They even found tiny hollow bird bones. So if something that small and fragile had survived, how could two entire children be missing? His conclusion was firm. We searched the site multiple times. I am completely confident the children were not in that house when it burned. And suddenly, what had been called a tragic accident turned into something darker, something that might not be accidental at all. That's when the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation stepped in and made a major move. They issued a statewide Amber Alert for Chloe Leverett and Gage Daniel. It was official the children were now being treated as missing, not deceased. Now, if you're familiar with how Amber Alerts work, this might raise some eyebrows. These alerts aren't issued lightly. There usually needs to be a confirmed abduction or strong evidence that a child has been taken. But in this case, the situation was so bizarre, so terrifyingly uncertain, that authorities issued the alert out of sheer urgency. No one had seen the children leave, and there were no reports of strangers in the area. But the absence of evidence in the fire left one horrifying possibility wide open. Someone might have taken them. And if they had, the fire may not have been the tragedy. It may have been the cover-up. By the time the Amber Alert went out, 6 days had passed since the fire. 6 days of silence. 6 days of searching through ash. 6 days with no bodies, no footprints, no sightings. The alert read, "The location of Chloe and Gage is unknown. If you have any information, please contact the TBI. Authorities have no reason to believe the children have left the state." Helicopters were deployed with infrared scanners, capable of detecting heat signatures in the forest. Scent tracking dogs were brought in to see if the children had maybe escaped the fire and wandered into the woods. Rescue teams scoured the area on foot through barns, fields, creeks, and along dirt roads that hadn't been touched in years. But there was nothing. No pieces of clothing, no scent trail, no signs of life. Now some people clung to the theory that maybe, just maybe, the children had run from the fire and gotten lost. And for a moment that seemed plausible. Two scared kids in the middle of a terrifying situation, running blindly into the woods. But the more people thought about it, the less it made sense. For starters, Gage's condition made running, especially over uneven terrain, extremely difficult. Dandy Walker syndrome affects balance and coordination. It's not likely he could have gotten far, especially in the dark. Even if Chloe had been helping him, someone would have seen them. There were lights from other houses nearby, familiar paths to follow. Family lived close. These weren't city kids dropped in the wild. This was their home. They knew the land. So if they had escaped the fire and survived, why hadn't they come out? Why hadn't anyone seen them? The theory that they simply fled the fire began to fall apart. And in its place, a far more chilling question took shape. Were Chloe and Gage taken before the fire started? And if that was the case, was the fire set intentionally to destroy evidence? With a potential crime now on their hands, investigators had to start asking some hard questions. Starting with, who would want to harm this family? They began by re-examining Molly and Bubba's remains. Could there have been signs of foul play before the fire ever started? But unfortunately, the fire had done its damage. Both autopsies came back inconclusive. The bodies were too badly burned to determine exact causes of death. So now attention turned to those closest to the children. Chloe's mother, Cheryl, and Gage's father, since Chloe's biological father had passed away, were both brought in for questioning. Years earlier, DCS, the Department of Children's Services, had already been involved with the family, which is what led to Molly and Bubba getting custody in the first place. So naturally, authorities had to consider the possibility, however difficult, that one of the parents may have tried to reclaim the children. Both Cheryl and Gage's father cooperated completely. They submitted to polygraph tests, answered every question, and allowed their homes to be searched. After thorough investigation, both were officially ruled out as suspects. The TBI even made a public statement confirming they had no reason to believe either parent was involved. So if not parents, then who? According to the family, if someone had taken Chloe and Gage, it had to be someone who knew the property. The farmhouse wasn't easy to find. It was buried deep in the backwoods, down a winding gravel path, past fields and old barns. You wouldn't just stumble across it by accident. Whoever came to that house came there on purpose. As investigators kept digging, they returned to the source of everything, the fire. They needed to know if it had been set deliberately. And to answer that, they brought in top-tier experts, fire specialists from the ATF, and even a man who had helped investigate the Oklahoma City bombing. If anyone could determine the cause, it would be them. But again, they found nothing conclusive. The fire had simply burned too hot, too fast. And then they figured out why. The McLaren home, though humble, had become a powder keg. There were space heaters in almost every room, oxygen tanks because Molly needed them for medical reasons. And worse, she was known to smoke cigarettes sometimes right next to her oxygen tanks. Add to that the fact that they may have been hoarding flammable items throughout the house, and you had the perfect storm. Investigators found over 30 propane tanks stored in the basement, leftovers from Bubba's old job. One spark, that's all it would have taken. And once the fire started, there was no stopping it. But even with all those contributing factors, not one of them was confirmed as the cause. The origin of the fire remained a mystery. Then came another strange detail, one that added to the growing sense that something just wasn't right. Remember how Molly and Bubba's bodies were found in the basement, perfectly side by side? Originally, it was assumed they had fallen through the floor when it collapsed. Bubba's bedroom was right above that section, so it made sense at first. But then investigators realized something odd. There were heavy pieces of debris from Bubba's room on top of their bodies, which meant they were already in the basement when the floor gave way. And that raised a massive question. Why were they down there? Even more strange, according to family, Molly and Bubba didn't even sleep in the same room anymore. They had separate bedrooms on opposite ends of the house, nearly 20 feet apart. They both had medical issues, and sleeping separately just made sense for them. So why were they found lying side by side in the basement? That detail shattered the original theory that they'd fallen through while sleeping. And it suggested something much darker. Was it possible that someone had brought them down to the basement before the fire started? And if so, why? The discovery of those 30 propane tanks gave everyone pause. For a moment, it seemed like the answer was right there. If the fire started in the basement, with all that fuel, it would explain everything. But just like every other part of this case, the ground shifted again. Because while the propane tanks explained how the fire burned so fiercely, they still couldn't explain how it started. And they still couldn't explain what happened to Chloe and Gage. At first, the propane tanks seemed like the answer. 30 of them tucked away in the basement of the McLaren home, just sitting there like silent bombs. Some people thought that one might have ruptured, maybe even exploded, and started the fire. For a moment, it actually made sense. I mean, think about it. The tanks were directly beneath the children's room. If something ignited down there, it could have turned that space into an inferno in seconds. Maybe that's why investigators couldn't find any trace of Chloe and Gage. Maybe. But like everything else in this case, the deeper investigators dug, the less it made sense. You see, propane tanks are built to withstand a lot. If one had exploded, the damage would have been obvious not just from the fire, but from the blast patterns, the residue, the sheer force of it. There would have been evidence all over the scene, char patterns on the floor joists, blast pressure indicators, signs of a true rupture. But investigators didn't find any of that. Not one of those tanks showed signs of exploding before or during the fire. In fact, most of them were completely empty and had been for decades. They weren't active tanks. They were just old, dusty, unused, sitting there like forgotten relics. So the idea that a tank sparked this fire? That theory was ruled out quickly. And again, that left us with the real haunting question. Why were Molly and Bubba found in the basement side by side at that hour of the night? What were they doing down there? Their family just couldn't accept the idea that they went into that basement voluntarily. Bubba was known for being cautious, especially with those tanks, with his tools, and with his basement in general. He was very protective of that space. According to his relatives, he never left that basement door open. It was always shut. Always. Safety was everything. So when investigators noted signs that the basement door had been left open, the family immediately felt something was wrong. Because Bubba wouldn't have left that door wide open. Not with 2 kids in the house. Not with 30 tanks full, or not sitting just beneath their bedrooms. That door being open didn't feel like an accident. It felt deliberate. Now, maybe, and this is just one possibility, maybe Bubba and Molly woke up to smoke. Maybe they heard something, rushed to the basement to put it out, and in the chaos left the door open. But there's another theory, one that's been eating away at the McLaren family ever since that night. What if they didn't go down there by choice? What if someone else was in the house that night? What if someone came to the door and forced them into that basement? What if someone knew exactly what they were doing, knew that leaving the door open would create a kind of vacuum, drawing oxygen to the flames and making the fire burn hotter and faster? Because people who set fires on purpose, people who know arson, they understand things like that. It's not random, it's calculated. And what if that person took the kids? To the McLaren family, it's the only theory that explains the position of the bodies side by side, in the basement and the complete absence of the children's remains. Bubba's sister, Mary Lamb, said it best in one of the most heartbreaking statements ever made in this case. If those children weren't in that fire, then my brother died fighting for them. I believe the children were murdered. I think someone came, they let them in, did what they wanted with the adults, and took the children. And here's where things get even stranger. About a month before the fire, Molly and Bubba made a change to their will. They had rewritten it and named Chloe and Gage as the new beneficiaries. Let that sink in. We still don't know who was listed before the children. That information has never been made public, but it raises a chilling question. What if someone else was expecting to inherit? Someone who felt entitled, angry, someone who suddenly saw that inheritance, the house, the land, the assets slipping away into the hands of 2 young kids. And what if they wanted it back? That single change, that new will, may have painted a target on the family. Some believe this could have started as a twisted, greedy plan, one that may have involved taking the children, eliminating the adults, and hoping to somehow manipulate or cash in on what they left behind. But when federal agencies like the ATF and TBI got involved, maybe the plan started to fall apart. Maybe someone realized they were in too deep, that there was no way to pull off their plan without facing charges for murder, kidnapping, and arson. And if that theory seems far-fetched, consider this. The safe that was believed to hold the new will was never found. Was it destroyed in the fire? Melted down in the extreme heat? Maybe, but most safes are fire-resistant, and while they aren't indestructible, They're often the only things left standing after a blaze. Investigators couldn't say whether it was lost or removed, gone before the fire ever started. Either way, it added another unanswered question to an already overwhelming mystery. And this mystery only deepened with time. As the days turned to weeks and the weeks turned to years, new theories started to fade. But one thing didn't: hope. Because even though the fire took everything, the house, the family history, the sense of peace, it never gave back the truth about what happened to those kids. And then came the sightings. Incredibly, about a year after the fire, a woman in Tennessee claimed to have seen a girl who looked exactly like Chloe alive. She was so convinced that she took a photo. That photo made its way to Cheryl, Chloe's mother. And Cheryl didn't hesitate. She looked at the photo and said, "That's my daughter." Even law enforcement admitted the resemblance was striking, but the girl in the photo was never found, never identified. She disappeared just like the leads. Other potential sightings started to roll in: California, New York, Colorado, even Costa Rica. But none of them led to Chloe or Gage. And then something happened that sent chills down the spines of everyone following the case. Someone started ripping down the missing persons flyers posted around town. Why? Who does that? Usually it's someone who wants people to stop looking, someone who's hiding something, someone who knows the truth. But even with all these strange details, with all the theories, tips, and potential sightings, the case remains unsolved. And what's even more staggering, the Amber Alert for Chloe and Gage is still active, more than a decade later. In fact, this is believed to be the longest-running active Amber Alert in Tennessee history, and they are still looking. In 2022, 10 years after the fire, the TBI released age-progressed images of both children. Today, Chloe would be 20, Gage would be 18. Their mother, Cheryl, keeps those photos close. They're the closest thing she has to updated school pictures to seeing her babies grow up. But they're not comforting. They're bittersweet reminders of everything she's lost and everything she's still fighting for. It feels like more than 11 years, she says. It feels like 1,100. She refuses to give up. And honestly, who could blame her? The TBI, the FBI, and other agencies have received new tips over the years. But so far, nothing has led to the children. No arrests, no confessions, no definitive answers. Just two names, two faces, and a silence that grows louder with every year. Still, Cheryl believes. Somewhere out there, she thinks Chloe and Gage are alive, living new lives, maybe under new names, maybe unaware of what they left behind, maybe waiting for someone, anyone to recognize them and bring them home. And until that day comes, she will never stop searching. This case, it stays with you. Not because of what was found, but because of what wasn't. Two children, gone, not a trace, no remains, no confirmed sightings. Just a fire, a silence, and a question that refuses to be buried. What really happened to Chloe and Gage that night? After all the expert analysis, after the endless digging through ashes, after teams who handled 9/11's debris couldn't find so much as a tooth, we're left with one unshakable truth. They didn't just vanish. Someone knows something. Someone saw something. And whether that secret has been buried by fear, guilt, or silence, it's out there, waiting. Cheryl Daniel, their mother, wakes up every day holding on to hope. Not because she's naive, but because a mother knows. And her instincts tell her they're still out there. And that's the part that should haunt all of us. Because if Chloe and Gage didn't die in that fire, then someone took them. And if someone took them, where are they now? Are they safe? Do they even know who they are? Were they hidden away by someone who thought they were rescuing them? Or by someone who wanted to erase them? This story isn't just a tragedy, it's a challenge to all of us to look deeper, to pay attention, to speak up if something doesn't sit right. Because cases like this don't just fade because time passes, they fade when we stop looking. So here's what I want to ask you. What theory makes the most sense to you? Foul play, kidnapping, or something we haven't even thought of yet? Drop your thoughts in the comments. You never know who might read them, or what detail could finally bring this mystery to light. If this story moved you, disturbed you, made you stop and think, then please share it. Let their faces be seen. Let their names be remembered. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Here on True Crimes by Dominic, we tell stories that matter, stories that deserve answers. New cases drop every single week, and sometimes you could be the one who spots something everyone else missed. So comment, share, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next, because there are more stories out there, more cases with open endings, and together maybe we can help close just one. My name is Dominic, and this has been another haunting case on True Crimes by Dominic. Until next time, stay sharp, stay safe, and never stop asking questions.